Hello everyone, my name is Roy Jafari and I would like to welcome you to another video. In this video, we are going to start talking about the ethical aspects of data-driven decision making and data modeling. In this specific video, we are going to cover 8 pitfalls of data-driven decision making. These pitfalls are going to be a little bit technical, at the same time a little bit about the examples that we've been seeing regarding ethical aspects of data-driven decision making. So let's go over these 8 pitfalls. So these are the list of eight pitfalls. During this video, we're going to go over all of them. You may want to stop the video and look at them briefly, but before we get started talking about them, I would like to bring your attention to this last part of it before we get started thinking about this last part of this slide. And that is, you want to know that these pitfalls are not mutually exclusive, meaning that there might be an example or situation that from different aspects you could be explaining why the ethical aspect of it, or something went wrong about the ethical aspect of it, could be explained or could be discussed under a couple of these pitfalls. So it's not like this pitfall is just another completely different things. More or less, some of these are talking about the same thing, and I will mention those when there are similarity between them as we move throughout this video. Alright, so the first one, and perhaps the most important one, is biased and non-fair definition of success, right? So as we are developing more and more powerful data-driven decision-making model, and specifically AI and machine learning ones, that they have the power to grab the patterns from the data and make decisions that are connected to a definition of success, right? So whoever have this technology to grab these patterns, right, and this data could also be a data of individuals, right? A group of individuals, and the fact that the patterns are being recognized, that could be a problem. But whoever has this technology, they are in the driving seat. They are going to decide what is going to be the definition of success, and for them to make a decision of success that is just only about them, that is the beginning of all of the problems. So for example, in the case of social media, right? So these patterns are in the data, and then these machine learning AI algorithms are used to show you what posts you're supposed to be seeing, right? So what is the definition of success for these posts, for these these models? I would, my best guess would be the definition of success would be to engage you more, to get you to click on more advertisement. And the reason is that is the way that whoever owns that technology is making money, right? So their definition of success is going to be maximizing their profit, which is not fair. One could argue it's not fair. Why is that? Because social media has become a part of everyone's life, right? I mean, it's not someone could argue, if you don't have social media, you may not be able to be competitive, to get a good job, or like have a meaningful social life in this day and age. So because it's a necessity of this day and age, you might not want to be using this platform, and this platform comes with this baggage of this technologies are being used to get you to click on that advertisement, right? So that's why you would see that this defining a definition of success is very important, and for such platform, the users have to have a say, because this platform, necessity of life, have to have a say in what the definition of success should be. And that could change a lot of things. Imagine, in social media, the definition of success was to promote the health of the users, mental health, physical health, get them to work out more often, get them to eat healthier, get them to actually make meaningful connections that leads to meeting and creating community outside these platforms, right? So this is the bulk of all of the data-driven decision-making problem. It is that these powerful technologies are being used, and their definition of success is defined for a small group of people or the owners of these technologies. So that's the main issue here, bias and non-fair definition of success. But let me talk about two different concepts under this pitfall. First one is the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. These could be two different definitions of success. Let us go over what is the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Think about this before continuing to watch. Effectiveness is getting something right, doing it the right way, getting the correct answer. That's effectiveness, getting the job done correctly. So when we do something effectively, at the end of that process, the job is done correctly. So for example, let's assume a social media company wants to make sure that the connections on the platform leads to a healthy relationship outside the platform. Imagine we are living in that amazing world that's actually the effectiveness defined by the social media company, right? So this is the effectiveness. But what is efficiency? Efficiency is doing whatever it is that you want to get it done right with the least amount of resources, with the least amount of cost, with the least amount of money, with the least amount of human resources, right? So efficiency is the idea of being able to do it with the least amount of effort, with the least amount of cost, right? So efficiency is about doing it in a way that is better. And of course, if you want to increase your effectiveness, sometimes you have to compromise efficiency, right? And sometimes if you want to do something more effectively, more efficient, then effectiveness might drop, right? So there is that relationship between them. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, this paradigm does not, when we are designing a model, efficiency becomes more important just because we're seeing the amount of money we're spending. Whereas effectiveness could be more important. And, it's very important when you are thinking about, coming up with these data-driven decision-making models. A lot of times, the only buy-in that they get for a solution is that, look, we're going to do this way cheaper than you would have done. So for example, we've got a really good example here that it basically shows about why we have to pay attention to this paradigm, effectiveness and efficiency. And these two could be the definition of success, right? So imagine a judge wants to use a data-driven decision-making model to sort of help the judge in the process of deciding who should be released and who has the least probability or tendency to reoffend if we release them, right? So that could be really useful for the judge. Imagine the judge puts all of their trust in this data-driven decision-making model because the judge doesn't have to spend, their mental capacity, their time to go over these cases, right? I mean, each case they have to read it, they have to understand the situation, the person, the history. Instead of doing that to maximize efficiency, they just put all of their trust in this data-driven decision-making model. And of course, the efficiency is maximized because before it would take 5 days to process perhaps 10 cases, but now it takes 30 minutes to process those 10 cases, right? Of course, efficiency is maximized, but it's very hard not to accept that we have compromised on effectiveness. And in this case, because this is our judicial system, this is the backbone of our democracy, it's the backbone of being treated fairly, then we understand that even a little bit of effectiveness is is better to have, right? So as much as we can put resources to get a better effectiveness is more important to do, right? So that model does not work, and it's because we have forgotten effectiveness, and our efficiency is basically blinding our eyes. It's of course it's like making it much costs to our cost, but at what price, right? So that's the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. Another things I want to mention here before we move to the next pitfall is a very general concept about misusing and abusing. What's the difference between them, right? A lot of times when we define a non-fair definition of success, or in any specific situation, when we use a solution, a system, a technology not in the best possible way, there could be two situations. One situation is misusing, which is not doing the right thing or not applying the solution the best possible way, not with the intention of not wanting to do the right thing, just because you don't know any better, or because you're not aware of the best way to use this solution. And the other one is the abusing. The difference between abusing and misusing is that on abusing, you do know that there is a better way and you're not using that one. So for example, I would argue in the case of social media companies, tying the definition of success to their profit, that could be the case of abusing, because I'm sure they could understand this process because they have designed it. They are the quote unquote the owner of this technology. They could, if they wanted, to do the better or the right things for everyone, to create a platform that is creating more health for the users. So that's the difference between misusing and abusing, and that's a really good language to have and think about when you're dissecting a case, ethical data-driven decision-making case. All right, so let's move to the second pitfall. The first and second pitfall are very close. If there is a case of misusing and we don't know any better, that we might be using a proxy for our decision, for our definition of success, right? So what is a proxy? Proxy is a metric or a measurement that is being replaced instead of something that we were not able to measure. For example, we've got using the number of clicks on a website instead of user engagement, right? It's very difficult to actually measure user engagement, right? So we use a proxy that say, okay, I'm going to use the number of clicks on this website instead of user engagement. And that's a proxy, right? So it's not the user engagement, it's a proxy that points to it. And that's very important. And, a lot of times, it might be okay if you are sort of using a proxy just as a way to evaluate, but using a proxy to maximize is problematic, and we'll see why. And go over the other examples here about the proxies before continuing to watch this video. The third pitfall that is connected to the first and second one, especially the second one, is that if we don't have a definition of success that is fair or comprehensive, or is not a proxy, the actual thing, if we don't have it, using a metric optimizing supervised learning is not advisable, right? If we have a proxy, it's not the real thing, it's just pointing to the real thing, and we optimize for this one metric, this metric that is not the real thing, or if we have an unfair definition of success, or it's not comprehensive enough, we are just making a bad situation worse, because this is not what would be better for our decision-making environment. And when we optimize for this, which is the case of a lot of machine learning and AI algorithms, that they are connected with an optimization model, we are just making a bad situation worse. So let's look at why that's the case. In these four, hitting targets, we can see why that's the case. If we don't have a metric optimizing supervised learning, I mean, when we say metric optimizing, the supervised learning tries to reach to a better solution that optimizes this metric. It tries to improve the reliability of this solution, and by trying to improve the reliability, it becomes closer and closer to that metric, right? And when we have that, look at these two situations. We have those metric optimizing, the supervised learning, right? So we are making it more reliable. But when we don't use metric optimizing, our solutions are not as reliable. They are wider, right? So when we are using a proxy, right? For example, this is the real target, right? This is where the correct answer would be. When we are using a proxy, this is the center of our hits, right? This is the center of our hits. And you can see when we are using a proxy and if you have a metric optimized supervised learning, it just makes the bad situation worse. Of course, if we had that comprehensive, fair, non-proxy definition of success, which in most cases is elusive, it's not really easy to measure things like that. We will talk about that in another pitfalls as well. It's a lot of elusive. This situation is very elusive most of the time. Then it's better to not use those metric optimizing, not to go to just try to optimize this one metric or this group of metrics that are not fair or proxy. It's better to use a less powerful as far as like going towards this metric. So that's the third pitfall. The fourth pitfall, which is very similar to the third pitfall, is not being able to recognize the limits of measuring, right? Even if we have a measure that is not proxy and we are measuring exactly, let's say, the website engagement, the measuring process itself always have errors, right? We have discussed this. I mean, errors is the difference between our attempt to measure the reality and the reality, and there is always an error, and that error should always be in the back of our minds when we are about to use a metric optimizing supervised learning to optimize for a metric, right? If we think that we have a perfect model that can actually maximize this metric, we have to pay attention that even if we have a good metric, it's kind of fair, still the measurement could not be accurate. We never have 100% accurate measurement. So that's another point we want to pay attention. And the same concept goes here. The fifth one, which is a very interesting one, is to confuse measuring for evaluation than measuring for objective function. When we evaluate a system based on a few measures, right? We are paying attention that our measurement has limits, right? So we just evaluate. We have some criteria to make sure that our system is not off on the wrong track, right? So we measure it with the hope that these 3-4 evaluation allows us to have some sense of that the system is in the right track. But it becomes problematic when you actually get these evaluative measures and try to optimize for them. And what happens in these situations, you go off on these limited dimensions and lose the comprehensiveness of your dynamic, and you start optimizing on these few dimensions. And not only you lose the comprehensiveness of your evaluation, at the same time you just optimize on a few dimensions that may not be the reality. And we of course know, we do know that they are not the reality, because measuring is always has errors. Let's look at a few examples that makes more sense. So the first example is the course grade, right? Every time you're taking a course, there is a grade, and there is a final grade. There's a grade in between. These grades, I believe, as an educator, are meant to be a guideline for us to see if learning is happening and how well it is happening. But unfortunately, we have created an education system that grades are for optimization. Students want to maximize their grades, and instructors try to help students to maximize their grades. And it leads to overtraining on the specific of the questions, right? So you train yourself to do well on the exam. Does this mean that you're going to do well in the area that the course was trying to help you? A lot of times that's actually the case, that you overtrain yourself to do better on the exam. Once you actually want to do something in the job market, in your career, you might have to start learning, and that fails the students, and the education system in those situations fails the student to prepare the students for the career, for what they want to do, because they fail to consider that the metrics for evaluation is different than the metrics for objectives as an objective function. Another case study, another example is the duration of attention for case of posts in social media, right? So a social media company could look at a post, numbers of likes, numbers of comments, numbers, the number of minutes the users are looking at it, as a way to evaluate how engaging a post was. So that's just having it as an evaluation, right? So it's just an evaluation. But imagine the social media company decides to only show those posts that have higher likes numbers, higher numbers of comments, and people looking at it more often. But this is also a proxy, and this is an evaluation. When you use this evaluation as an objective function, it becomes problematic, right? Again, this system that you have created by optimizing on the numbers of likes and numbers of comments makes these system to create a situation that specific types of posts, that most of them are political, most of them are angry speech, are highlighted, and they come up, and it actually creates a situation that is not good for the society. So, and that's where the problem went. The problem was something was supposed to be just an evaluation, but it unfortunately was used as an objective function. Before we talk about this next pitfall, I would like to ask you to watch a video on YouTube. Type selective attention test and look for the video that a group of people are passing balls to each other. I mean, this is the page, this is the picture that you will see on the video. And watch that video. It's a very interesting and simple test. See how well you do on that test. And come back, continue watching this video. Of course, if you have watched the video, now you know that the video was not about you counting the number of passes the whites are making. It's about a phenomenon called tunnel vision. Because you were so focused on the balls being passed around, you missed the gorilla coming and making these movements and passing by you. So you basically fail to notice something very bizarre in your screen, and that is called tunnel vision. And that may happen as an individual, right? When you focus on something, you get a tunnel vision, you focus, you don't see other things that you may have seen otherwise. With data-driven decision making, we may be getting organizational tunnel vision. Organizational tunnel vision is because we can measure some specific aspect, or we are used to measuring some specific aspect of our environment. We solely focus on those numbers and we lose sight of the bigger picture. Let's look at a few examples. So for example, in the COVID public health crisis that we and it was way easy for us to calculate the number of cases, the number of hospitalization, and unfortunately the number of deaths. I mean, within the next day, the government had these numbers, and these were easily calculable or easily measurable dimensions. But another dimension that would have been important for the decision maker was the mental health. And this mental health, or the number of suicides that would happen in the next year, was not as immediately measurable. So the governments and whoever was deciding, they must have been influenced by just looking at these numbers, right? So they just wanted to minimize these numbers, and they may have made, they may have taken measures that fail to recognize there might be mental health issues in the future. Another example is diversity and inclusion. In the campuses, we can easily measure the number of ethnic groups, populations of campuses. This is an easy measurement, and if you want to improve on those measurements, you can do targeted recruiting. But then again, can we measure the feeling of inclusion? Didn't we want to create inclusion in our campuses as well? Are we, just focusing on the diversity part because it's more difficult to measure inclusion? So that's another example of getting a tunnel vision, just because one metric is easier for us to be calculating. Another example is the education systems that uses another sort of like an immediate metric possible, and they try to optimize for that. So this metric is course evaluation done by students, right? So what the education systems in all over the world use now is right after a course or towards the ending of the course, they ask students about the evaluation. And of course, they want to improve this student evaluation, but this is not actually what the education system would want to move forward. The better metric would be to ask students about what they thought about the material after they have had a chance to work, right? So that would be a better metric. But since we cannot easily have that, we don't know where the students are, and it's more costly to have those types of metrics, those types of measuring, we use this one, and it gives us tunnel vision, and it's not good for the education and for the career of the students. The seventh pillar, pitfall, is failure to recognize the limits of modeling. So I want to use George Punk's famous sentence about this pitfall, and that is, essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. And there is a lot of wisdom in this sentence. And for us, we need to understand we accept the wrongness of a model because of its usefulness, right? So let's talk about what's a model. Model is a mapping of the reality by using some assumptions. So we sort of like map the reality, and the reality is not the model. We make assumptions and have a smaller version of the reality, so we can take advantage of this model for usefulness. And we don't want the map to be too complicated or too simple. We want just right for its usefulness, right? Why some models are wrong? Of course, we simplify them, and we simplify the reality by making assumptions. These assumptions could be implicit or explicit, doesn't matter. If there is an assumption, you don't have the reality, you have a model. And always you want to pay attention to this. Again, we come back to what we were discussing about the judge, right? One thing that the judge may have not recognized is that, this is just a model. This is not the reality. And, of course, we use this as sort of like seeing that, the judge may have been sort of like deceived by the efficiency of this model bringing for it. But at the same time, the judge may have not seen that this is just a model. And, there are a lot of assumptions behind this model. And if the judge does not understand those assumptions, maybe the judge should not be using the system for making decisions. And for the judge to be empowered to use the system in the right way, the judge, of course, needs to understand these assumptions first. And without that, that would not be a wise move to use this system to, blindly just make decisions about companies. The last one is, it's kind of like the same thing. I, have put my own picture here as a way to, show parallel with the George Barnes, just as a way to humor. So I'd say a model without assumption is not a model, it's the reality itself. Just an emphasis on the previous pitfall is that every time we have a model, it is our responsibility to spend time, recognize our assumptions in the model. And if you are presenting a model and you're not representing your assumptions, you have to pay attention. You've not done your due diligence. And that is the very important and actually the most important part of being ethical about data-driven decision-making, is that you want to recognize your implicit and explicit assumption. You don't want to have any implicit assumptions. You want to make all of them explicit. And once the assumptions are made, then you could also communicate those to whoever is going to use your models for decision-making. And there are a few common assumptions. These are not exhaustive. There are a few common assumptions in the data models that I've listed them here. There are 5 of them. In the next video, we're going to go over these common assumptions in the data-driven decision-making. So in this video, we talked about 8 technical ways you could think about or discuss the ethical aspects of data-driven decision-making. Of course, throughout the video, I mentioned that there is a similarity between this pitfall and that pitfall, and they are not mutually exclusive, and they have a lot of overlaps, and one situation may be explained by more than one of these pitfalls. Until the next video.